Maxine Miller, also known as Maxine Minx, was born sometime in 1953. While we never see a birth certificate, we can work this out based on her age of 32 in the summer of 1985.
I'm gonna be 33 years old pretty soon.
She was born in Texas as an only child to Ernest Miller, an evangelical preacher, and her mother, whose name and occupation is unknown. Maxine was raised in a strict religious household, where her religious father was a dominating force in her life, using his sermons as both public proclamations and personal reprimands. His parenting style revolved around rigid discipline, instilling in his daughter the expectation of obedience. Ernest dreamed of Maxine one day becoming the star of his church, molding her into his own image. At 6 years old in 1959, Maxine was already dreaming of stardom and the life she deserved. At the time, she was happy to walk in her father's footsteps. In 1965, a 12-year-old Maxine was attending the All Saints Academy. While little is known about her time there, it was most likely a Christian school that reflected the values of the era, emphasizing discipline and conformity just like her father. This oppressive upbringing would eventually leave her yearning for freedom and self-expression, fueling her eventual rebellion and drive to forge her own path. At some point in her late teen years or early 20s, Maxine left her childhood home. Her father blamed it on perverts and swindlers, leading her into a life of sin, but Maxine dreamed of a life of stardom, of making something of herself.
I don't know about you, but I got better places to be than where I came from.
The runaway headed for Houston, Texas, where she got a job dancing at a cocktail bar called the Bayou Burlesque, and changed her name to Maxine Minx. The new surname literally means an impudent, cunning, or boldly flirtatious girl, a direct reference to the new image she wanted to craft for herself. But this wouldn't be the last time she would reinvent herself. Sometime later, while working at the bar, she met an older married man named Wayne Gilroy. Wayne would eventually leave his wife and strike up a romance with the would-be star, telling her they would marry one day. Maxine's life up to this point was defined by the confines of her religious upbringing, and her dreams of being a star reached far beyond her father's hopes for her in the church. She wanted to define herself on her own terms, but this put her in conflict with those who clung to the traditional values that she now opposed. If you want to know about the unspoken truths of Maxine's past and what it might tell you about your own upbringing, stick around to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History. I mean, horror history. Maxine is a central protagonist in TiWest X and the titular character of its sequel, MaXXXine, released 2 years later. Ambitious and determined, Maxine serves as a striking counterpart to Pearl, the tragic villain of X, with the characters, both played by MiaGoth, embodying two sides of the same coin. But before getting into that, let's set the stage for X. In 1979, the Western world was suffering from an energy crisis caused by reduced oil production during the Iranian Revolution. Things were especially severe in the US due to its heavy reliance on foreign oil. The skyrocketing oil prices not only strained household budgets, but also fueled a period of stagflation, an unusual combination of high inflation, stagnant economic growth, and rising unemployment. This left many struggling to make ends meet.
Well, this county raised property taxes. A little bit of cash goes a long way out here. We're not the only ones trying to make a buck.
Adult entertainment was also on the rise after the sexual revolution of the 1960s. The emergence of home video technology made adult content more accessible and profitable, allowing small-scale productions like the one seen in X to find an audience and succeed. The sexual revolution was basically the social shift that caused attitudes towards sex to loosen up, no pun intended, especially among the younger generation. There were also more women entering the workforce, gaining more financial freedom and independence. This progression wasn't accepted universally, and the 1970s also saw a resurgence of conservative religious movements. With the rise of the moral majority in 1979 and televangelists, basically preachers who broadcast their messages on TV and radio, there was a push to return to traditional values. For Maxine, the adult industry appeared to offer financial success and the freedom from her strict upbringing that she wanted. She dreamed of being a star and saw this as a way to get it. But to fully undress Maxine's journey to the top, we've got to take it back to her very first foray into adult film. We first see Maxine in the dressing room of the Bayou Burlesque on July 30th, 1979, where she's taking drugs and preparing for a road trip. Her producer boyfriend, Wayne, wants her to go easy on that stuff and tells her that she's special.
There ain't nobody else out there like you.
That's a double negative there, Wayne, and maybe a nod to the fact that there was someone just like her. But while the sweet talking seems to put a smile on her face, she isn't someone who relies on external validation.
You're a f***ing sex symbol.
Maxine frequently uses mantras like this as affirmations to reinforce her determination to claim the life that she believes is rightfully hers on her own terms. By repeating these phrases, she asserts control over her destiny. She also uses some of the same mantras used by her father in his religious preachings. It becomes an act of defiance. She's rebelling against the original use of the phrase and making it her own. Seeing the financial success of Texas-based adult films like Debbie Does Dallas, Wayne has an idea for them to tap into that success and make their own adult film titled The Farmer's Daughter. Wanting to leave behind her life of struggles for a shot at stardom, Maxine joins her boyfriend and a group of friends as they set out on a road trip to a rented boarding house on a remote farm in rural Texas. The group consists of fellow dancer Bobby Lynn Parker, ex-Marine Jackson Hull, student filmmaker RJ Nichols, and his girlfriend Lorraine Day. On the road, Maxine reads over the script and voices her dislike of the church mouse Lorraine, who stares at her uncomfortably. It's an interesting comment from someone who must experience being stared at most days dancing at the bar and who's desperately seeking stardom. But it's very telling of Maxine's determination and willingness to do whatever it takes to achieve her dreams.
I've been being patient my whole life. I need to be famous, Wayne. I'm ready for the high life. Sick and tired of never getting what I want.
Of course, her dislike of Lorraine probably stems from more than just her creepy habits. Lorraine is religious, even wearing a cross around her neck, a physical representation of everything Maxine is trying to escape. After they arrive at the farm, Wayne receives a less than warm welcome from the owner, Howard Douglas. Maxine senses something's wrong, causing her to reach for the gun her boyfriend keeps in his glove box. But the confusion is resolved, and Maxine helps everyone unpack the van. This is when she spots someone looking at her from an upstairs window. The woman in question is the farm owner's wife, Pearl Douglas. Pearl sees herself in the young Maxine. Literally. Maxine is the spitting image of Pearl when she was younger, and she's not the only one who notices. Howard is also taken by surprise by the likeness to his wife. Of course, there was no way of knowing just how dangerous this likeness would become. And you know what else is dangerous? Going to war. But you can experience the adrenaline of war from the safety of your own home or wherever with today's sponsor, War Thunder, the free-to-play epic multiplayer military action game with airplanes, helicopters, warships, and yes, even a fucking tank. War Thunder captures the intensity of the battle with military vehicles spanning from the mid-20th century to the present. We're talking guided missiles, attack drones, and nuclear strikes. You can actually do that. On top of that, the graphics, physics, and sound are constantly being updated, so the game is just getting more and more immersive. New update! Storm Warning is the newest major update, rolling out the highly anticipated Eurofighter Typhoon, Rafale, plus M44 for ground combat, and the new map, Attica. They've also rolled out ray tracing, fully realistic shadows, lighting, and reflections with optimization and enhancement for the PS5 Pro. You can download War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox using the link in the description. New players and those who haven't played in 6 months will receive some special bonuses, 100,000 Silver Lions, a special decorator Eagle of Valor, and more. You can also fully immerse yourself in exciting battles in War Thunder Mobile, an epic mobile multiplayer action game. Download it and play for free on iOS or Android using the link in the description. Maxine takes a walk down to the lake to cool off with some swimming and a close encounter with the alligator. Unbeknownst to her, Maxine's skinny dipping is watched from the trees by Pearl, who later beckons her up to the farmhouse for a glass of lemonade and some scintillating conversation. She downs her drink in a desperate bid to leave, but not before getting a harsh look at what her future might be as the old woman tells her,
"Not everything in life turns out how you expect."
For Maxine, this moment is deeply unsettling. The contrast between the young, hopeful Pearl in the photos and the bitter woman who now stands in front of her is a reflection of her own greatest fear of failure. Pearl's story challenges her belief in herself, proving that ambition isn't always enough. This conversation acts as a warning and a motivator to the would-be star, and she sneaks out without Howard seeing her and returns to the boarding house where she gets ready for her scenes, more determined than ever.
"I will not accept a life I do not deserve."
Later, over beers and disgusting-looking sandwiches, Lorraine can't help but stare at the couples again, which angers Maxine and triggers a confrontation. While she's willing to be gawked at in order to achieve her dreams, Lorraine's gaze might feel different, like a challenge to her newfound control over her life. However, she discovers that Lorraine's gaze is not one of judgment, but of curiosity. The group talk about the emotional implications of being in an adult film while also being in a relationship, and how the potential money to be made from the film will lead them all to bigger and better things. The others toast to being young, having fun, and to independent cinema. But Maxine toasts to something else, living life on your own terms. Later that night, after Lorraine surprises everyone by expressing her own desire to be in the video, the two women help her prepare for an impromptu scene, and chaos unfolds around the farm as Pearl and Howard begin killing off members of the filming crew one by one. Pearl was motivated by her desire to recapture the dreams of her youth, inspired by seeing her young doppelganger. Unaware of what's unfolding around her, Maxine sleeps soundly. That is, until she wakes to find Pearl in her bed caressing her with bloody hands. happens. She screams, which sends the old woman running from her room. Well, you know, shuffling from her room. Maxine cleans herself up and takes a hit of cocaine, intending on searching for her missing friends and boyfriend. Like her sexual behavior, drug use represents her liberation from her strict religious household, where such behavior would have been seen as sinful. Before she's able to leave the boarding house, Maxine hears Pearl and Howard coming and hides under her bed, where she's forced to stay and listen as the decrepit couple jump each other's bones. Probably literally, I'm gonna try not to think about it. Finding a moment when the pair are distracted, she sneaks out and runs for the van, only to find the cameraman RJ dead and the tires slashed. Hearing Lorraine's screams for help, she grabs Wayne's gun and heads into the farmhouse to rescue her. Despite Maxine's pleas to stay inside, Lorraine panics and runs outside, only to be shotgun blasted by Howard, who dies shortly after when Lorraine's twitching body scares him into a heart attack, leaving only Maxine and her octogenarian doppelganger alive. Maxine is unmoved by Pearl's pleas for help and demands the keys to their truck. While Pearl isn't physically very capable, her verbal attacks probably cut even deeper, calling her a deviant who will end up just like she did. With Pearl staring at her and the sounds of a televangelist preaching about sin blaring on the TV in the background, Maxine snaps.
I'm nothing like you. You're a kidnapping, murdering sex fiend. I'm a f***ing star. The whole world is gonna know my name. I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
Pearl's attempt to shoot Maxine backfires in the most literal way possible as the force sends her flying back out of the door, breaking her hip. So, with the keys to the truck in hand, Maxine prepares to drive away. But Pearl continues to shout at her, angered by her youth and ability to leave the farm and her situation. The one thing she could never do.
It'll all be taken from you. Just like it was from me.
After hearing this, Maxine reverses the truck over Pearl's head. But the taunts strike at what Maxine fears most, failure and being unable to escape from where she came from. The crushing of Pearl's skull symbolically crushes the voices of judgment that have haunted her throughout her life. As she drives away as the lone survivor, she says the words divine intervention, a phrase she'd heard earlier, spoken by the televangelist Ernest Miller, the strict father from which Maxine had run away from, still echoing in her ears, now through broadcast waves. But Maxine didn't yet know just how far his shadow could reach. After the events on the Douglas farm, Maxine didn't return to her family or her job dancing at the Bayou Burlesque. Instead, she left Texas altogether and moved to LA, probably hoping to avoid the stress of any litigation for the massacre, get outside the range where her father's sermons were broadcasted in, and most importantly, become a star. Running from her past had worked the first time, kind of, so why not try it again? She began a successful career in the adult film industry. The early 80s saw the rise of VHS, making film and adult content more accessible. Remember the adults only section behind the curtain in video stores? I don't, because I was a little tiny baby in the 90s when they started going away, but in 1985, the home video industry was thriving, offering opportunities for filmmakers and performers alike. But with the rise of readily available access to more media came the rise of censorship. The 1980s saw increasing debate over censorship in media, driven by the fear of its influence on society, in particular, the younger generation. The decade began with the introduction of MPAA's updated age-based rating system for movies. Horror movies came under fire for their violent and sexual content, and the music industry faced a campaign from the PMRC, who wanted explicit content warnings to be put on albums from rock, metal, and pop artists. If I was alive at the time, I would have been so pissed at this personal attack. Censoring horror and metal? What's next, warning labels for roller coasters? For Maxine, this brought new challenges, and while the home video boom helped her build her career, there were once again people with strict religious beliefs and traditional values controlling her ability to achieve the stardom that she so desperately dreamed of. The 1980s also saw the rise of satanic panic, a widespread moral hysteria that was fueled by fears of occult influences and ritualistic abuse of the young. This fear coincided with the crimes of the serial killer Richard Ramirez, who was known as the Night Stalker, who during the course of 1984 and 1985 carried out a series of home invasions and killings. At some point during her time in LA, due to the threat of violence, Maxine buys herself a new gun, which she keeps under her pillow at night and in her bag when she goes out. The daily threat people were experiencing from the Night Stalker isn't the first time she was exposed to violence, and her past experiences have taught her how to protect herself. Maxine also changed her look from brunette to blonde, a sign that she's trying to adapt and reinvent herself by taking control of her identity. She'd already done it once before when she changed her name from Maxine Miller to Maxine Minx. I find this change in identity, especially the choice in her hair color, interesting. We've seen that Maxine tends to rebel against those who would hurt her or hold her back from the life that she wants. Maybe this change in look is a rebellion against Pearl, trying to separate herself from the woman who was a bleak image of what her own future could look like.
You know I don't like bombs.
Maxine finds herself in an apartment above an adult book and video store, and wanting to make hay while the sun shines, works as a dancer at CZsWorld, while also filming adult films on a set behind the club known as the Landing Strip. During daylight hours, the aspiring star fills her days working and auditioning for mainstream film roles, believing that her career in porn can only take her so far. On July 5th, 1985, Maxine, now 32, auditioned for the role of Veronica in the horror sequel The Puritan 2, written and directed by British filmmaker Elizabeth Bender. Because religious horror is so oversaturated that we're now getting religious horror movies within our religious horror movies.
I've seen the devil stalking me like a specter from the past, haunting my dreams, my nightmares.
Her delivery is full of emotion as she speaks of the power of the devil in her, forcing her to do terrible, murderous things. A devil that has now returned to punish her for living her life. Veronica's words mirror the events from Maxine's own life, but she now uses the traumatic events from her past to deliver a powerful audition, turning her pain into something instructive. Maxine leaves, confident that she's nailed the audition, which does set her apart from how Pearl left her audition 67 years earlier. Maxine heads off to the set behind the landing strip to film. She's invited to a party in the hills that night, but says she can't go, as she has a shift at CZsWorld later. Back home, getting ready for her next job, she receives a call from her agent, Teddy Knight, who tells her she got the role in The Puritan 2. As she works her shift at CZsWorld, I bet the tippers that night were getting to dance with some extra gusto, but one member of her audience, who obviously takes fashion inspiration from the world of Italian horror, seems more angered than aroused. For a second time that day, Maxine is offered to join a friend at a party in the hills, but she says no as she has to get up early for a fitting the next day. Her friend warns her to be careful, considering the namesake of the Night Stalker, but Maxine says that she can handle herself, referring to the fact that she drove over the head of the last person who tried to kill her. But she had no idea just how soon she'd have the opportunity to exercise those survival skills. She's followed by a man into a secluded alley and threatened with a knife. But Maxine has a will to live that would even impress John Kramer, and a bloodlust to match. She turns the situation around on her would-be attacker, baiting him in by looking helpless, pulling a gun on him, and forcing him to strip before crushing both his ego and manhood under the heels of her 5-inch stripper boots.
Do you know what happened to the last person who tried to kill me? I crushed her f***ing head.
The scene highlights what's different about this new 1980s version of her. She's done running from those who threaten her and is inclined to fight back. To celebrate her getting the role of Veronica, she invites her gay friend Leon over to watch The Puritan. After the pair fall asleep, Maxine is woken by a package delivery and comes face to face with a ghost from her past. A tape containing footage from the farmer's daughter that was recovered by police on July 31st and now has been cataloged as police evidence for a case known as the Texas Porn Star Massacre by the media. Not only is the tape an unwelcome reminder of her past, but it's also evidence that she was there when the murders happened. For Maxine, the pursuit of stardom is not only a battle to achieve fame, but an ongoing fight to keep it. And this tape shatters the illusion that her past is safely behind her. On July 6th, Maxine heads to the film studios for a fitting of a special effects life cast. Troubled by the previous night, she's plagued by images of Pearl as she sits cased in the mold, causing her to panic and fall out of her chair. In a way, Pearl got revenge all of these years later for smashing her head. After the fitting, she finds a note on her windshield which reads, "For a good time, call 213-249-1619. Although she's not exactly in the mood for games, the fact that the note is written on a copy of her photo in a middle school yearbook leads her to call the number. A man on the other end instructs her to meet him on the 34th floor of the Bonaventure Hotel in 1 hour. There, she meets John Labatt, a private detective hired to find her by a powerful man who prefers to stay nameless. Labatt reveals that he knows about the killings that took place 6 years ago in Texas and pressures her to attend a soiree at 166 Starlight Drive that night. Otherwise, RJ's video will be leaked to the media and she may never work in this town again. Faced with her worst fear, failure, and ending up back where she started, Maxine is left in a situation where she's out of control of her own life, with someone else trying to dictate what happens. Of course, when people try to trap Maxine in a corner, she tends to fight back. Her day only gets better when she's questioned by homicide detectives Williams and Torres about the recent deaths of her LA friends and colleagues, Tabby Martin and Amber James. The detectives picked the wrong day to play good cop, bad cop though, as Maxine's self-preservation kicks in and she refuses to speak with them. As she returns to the film studio for her meeting with the director, Elizabeth Bender, the pair strike up a conversation, which is a key moment for Maxine. The conversation begins with Bender saying that the producers didn't want her for the role of Veronica, worried that their satanic horror film might be too controversial if it had a porn star in it. She says that she stuck her neck out to defend Maxine because she had something that no one else had.
What you said in the audition, it was special. Raw, real. ruthless.
Like Maxine, Bender is someone rebelling against the constraints of conformity and censorship. Her words remind Maxine of who she really is.
Are you ruthless?
Yes, ma'am.
The director describes Veronica as a powder keg ready to explode. This description resonates deeply with Maxine as, like Veronica, she is a killer but not necessarily a villain. She's a victim of circumstances, but also a survivor who is forced to do whatever it took to, well, survive. The shift between her earlier conversation with Labatt to the pep talk from Elizabeth Bender takes Maxine on a journey from feeling trapped by the crimes of her past to being reminded that she is someone who refuses to be victimized or judged for doing what was necessary to endure. For her, failure isn't an option.
Could be the defining role of your career. Which is why I need to know you're willing to do whatever it takes.
I am.
As if your life depended on it.
It does.
And she really means it. But as Maxine imagines a familiar figure in the upstairs window of the Bates house from Alfred Hitchcock's famous horror movie Psycho, she's reminded that this could all be taken away from her.
Very few come this far. To stay here, you must make it your obsession, eliminate all other distractions, because if you take your eye off that prize for even a moment, the beast will spit you right back out where you came from. May never get a taste for you again.
The image of Pearl, juxtaposed inside the Bates house set, has many layers of meaning. Not only does it represent the biggest ghost of her past still lingering in her potential future in Hollywood, but in Psycho, the titular character struggles to separate two personalities in his head, just as Maxine must fight to prevent her personal issues from affecting her career. Maxine leaves the studio with a renewed determination to fight for what she believes is rightfully hers. A fight the private detective would experience firsthand as she repeatedly punches him in the face after he follows and antagonizes her. She then heads over to the offices of her agent Teddy and confides in him about the killings at the Douglas farm, the tape, and the private detective. He tells her that he's going to take care of it and that she should go home and learn her lines. It's a rare moment in which we actually see Maxine show trust in someone else. On July 7th, Maxine is taken to the police station by Detectives Williams and Torres after discovering that her friend Leon was killed the night before. They show her the bodies of the 3 victims and explain that while the murders have been made to look like the Night Stalker's work, they don't think he's responsible. The only thing that links the victims together is their friendships with Maxine, and the cops suggest that it looks suspicious that she isn't more scared.
Could be you on one of these slabs, Maxine.
But it's not.
Over the years, shaped by her past traumas, Maxine has developed a distrust of authority figures. Figures like her father, leaders of the church, and the law. And it's made her defiant and unwilling to help the police.
You're supposed to help me save the next girl's life. Maybe she should save herself. I did.
The scars of years spent rejecting the figures that failed her reinforced her solo approach to conflict. But it wouldn't be long until she realized that some problems could be better addressed with the help of others. After being reprimanded for her tardiness by her sarcastically ironic director,
We've all got blood on our hands now.
and chased to the set of the Bates Motel by Labatt, Maxine decides to squash the distractions in her life. With the help of a friend and her agent, she sets a trap for the private detective, luring him to a nightclub where he's knocked unconscious with a baseball bat. He wakes up to find himself cuffed to the steering wheel of a car going through a compactor, and as his pleas fall on deaf ears, he is crushed to death, which is the common method of attack used on all 3 of Maxine's victims to this point. The style of Maxine's attacks implies that they're emotional for her. They're not just acts of self-defense, but acts of punishment to those who threaten her life or success. Crime statistics have historically shown that women are likely to kill in a method that creates physical distance between them and the attacker, like poisoning. But Maxine's violence is neither distant nor impersonal. She chooses to eliminate threats in the most direct and brutal way. The method of her attacks also sets her apart from her doppelganger Pearl, who lashes out at the world that left her behind, while Maxine crushes those who try to stand in her way, ensuring nothing can drag her back into the life that she escaped. Back in her apartment, Maxine is struck by something a news anchor says on the TV and remembers the conversation that she had earlier in the day with co-star Molly Bennett. Molly had mentioned attending a flashy party at a house in the hills just like Amber and Tabby. She puts everything together, her friends being targeted and invited to the same place, their deaths shortly after, and the threat of retribution if she didn't go as well. She fishes the address out of the trash and decides to drive up to the house. She should really be recycling that envelope anyway. In the past, Maxine only ever focused on her own survival and ambition, but perhaps Labatt, trying to blackmail her with the yearbook page, reminded her of her younger self. The version of herself that had felt trapped and powerless, just like Molly Bennett probably was up on Starlight Drive. Her rebellion has always been about control, whether that be control over her body, her career, or her own survival. By saving Molly, she can change that rebellion into something constructive, a shift in self-awareness that her counterpart, Pearl, never achieved. Or maybe her reluctance to help save her other friends in LA has more to do with what happened last time she tried to save someone.
I never should have
listen to you. This is all your fault. I hate you.
At 166 Starlight Drive, Maxine comes face to face with the gloved killer, who turns out to be none other than her televangelist father, Ernest Miller. The preacher was the one who killed Maxine's friends, a fact that was discovered when she stumbled into a suitcase packed with Molly's severed body parts, sending it tumbling down the stairs. He recorded the murders as part of his film, exposing what he believed to be sin and corruption in Hollywood. So do blackmail and murder not count as sins? Or is this one of those cases of it's only bad when you do it? Planning to save his runaway daughter, he knocks her unconscious, ties her to a tree, and begins to perform an exorcism. But not until he's given a performance for the camera. Dude really loves the sound of his own voice, doesn't he? Detectives Torres and Williams, who had followed Maxine up to the house, arrive on the scene and turn it into the scene of a shootout. Torres goes after Ernest as he tries to make a run for it, and Williams tells Maxine to wait for backup. But if there's anything we know about Maxine, it's that she isn't the type to sit around and wait to be saved. And after spending most of her life running, she now has a chance to face her past head on, and she's not going to miss it. The detectives are fatally wounded in their pursuit of the unhinged evangelist, leaving Maxine to confront her father alone, armed with a shotgun. The preacher tries to explain that everything he did for her, but ultimately he failed, allowing her to enter a life of sin. Maxine fantasizes about a future where she helped stop her father's killing spree, finished filming The Puritan 2, and attends the premiere to the sound of people cheering her name. She turns to the camera and delivers some advice to aspiring young women wanting to make it in Hollywood.
You gotta be willing to do whatever it takes.
Returning to reality, still standing behind the Hollywood sign, Maxine makes her father repeat his mantra with her, once more highlighting how she has repurposed his teaching for her own benefit.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
And then she blows his head off, but not before she tells him that he didn't fail her. He gave her everything she needed.
Divine in their revenge.
This is one of many mantras that Maxine has used through the years. For Ernest Miller, divine intervention is a tool of control. He uses the phrase for moral judgment, presenting his daughter's rebellion from her upbringing and familial constraints as a deviation from obedience. When Maxine says the phrase, it's almost an ironic subversion. For her, divine intervention isn't about submission to a higher force. Instead, it's self-made. Her own strength, defiance, and will to survive are all the intervention she needs. So when she says that he gave her all that she needed, she means that her past taught her the tools that she needed to survive. She not only survived them, but also used them to empower herself and take full control over her life. 1 month later, in August 1985, Maxine was back on the set of The Puritan 2, and her director comments on how she's dressed like a Hitchcock blonde, or an archetype in Alfred Hitchcock's horror and suspense films of a well put together female lead with blonde hair. It's a bit of a callback to the image that she imagined at the Psycho house, showing that she's moved towards her Hollywood future rather than her Texas past. As she's called onto set, she looks in the mirror and says,
You're a fucking movie star.
This is an evolution of the mantra she told herself 6 years ago, bringing Maxine's journey full circle. You're a fucking sex symbol reflected her desire to escape her oppressive past and create her own identity, and it's evolved into a declaration of fulfillment. She's finally achieved her dream. After a forced minute of silence for Molly Bennett, Elizabeth Bender speaks to Maxine and asks her what she wants to do now that everyone knows her name, to which Maxine replies she just never wants it to end. Maxine's rebellion wasn't just about rejecting her father's rules. It was a fight to discover who she was beyond the rigid framework of her childhood. She dreamed of becoming a star in the finer things in life. This defiance fueled her decision to make it in the adult film industry, not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone using her sexuality to get power. And rather than succumbing to the weight of the past, she transformed her traumas into motivation, using the tools at her disposal and the lessons of her past had taught her to survive. Unlike her counterpart Pearl, whose own dreams and defiance warped into bitterness and frustration, Maxine adapts to challenges and uses her desires constructively. By the end of her journey, she is no longer a symbol defined by others, but a fully realized individual wielding her own power. But it's not like she's really better for it like she believes she is. Sure, she survived, but she's still doing coke, she still has to live with the fact that she killed people, and her success in Hollywood is not guaranteed just by being in one horror sequel. I often think about the hard-to-predict relationship between the way a child is raised and who they go on to be as adults. It's clear that Maxine becomes sexually deviant, attention-hungry, and violent as a result of her upbringing that demonized all of those things. In the end, we learn that her dad was a psychopath, and while we don't see much of her childhood, we can assume that it was her dad's behavior that eventually pushed her away. But on the other hand, look at someone like me. I mean, I come from a loving family, and I was never pushed towards horror or metal by my parents, but I was also never banned from those things. I just ended up seeking them out when I was a teenager, and my parents didn't really try to stop that. But there are other traits that I probably did get from my parents, like my dad's love of baseball and my mom encouraging me to get involved in creative projects. And I know plenty of people in the horror fandom who are there because their parents showed them The Exorcist when they were 6 and they just never stopped loving it. At the same time, positive reinforcement doesn't always work. There was this program launched in schools in the 80s called DARE, or Drug Abuse Resistance Education, and long story short, it told kids to say no to drugs, but they had to get rid of it because it was making kids do more drugs. After looking into this stuff, I'm convinced that there's just no one-size-fits-all approach, and it's very difficult to determine which tactics actually work to improve a kid's behavior. For example, DARE was replaced by a new program called Keepin' It Real, and research suggests that it's more effective than DARE was, but it's also a different generation. How do we know today's kids aren't just more opposed to drugs as a form of rebellion against their parents who do drugs? Maybe Maxine's kids will be like her, or maybe they'll be prude and straight edge. I think the better takeaway is to focus on the difference in fate between Pearl and Maxine. Breaking out from the rural area she was raised in helped Maxine achieve her dreams in a way that Pearl, trapped on her parents' farm until the day she died, was never able to. But to fully understand their dynamic and their dreams of stardom, check out my episode on Pearl. You'll find that video on the left. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.